Hello, I'm Rob, this is Martin, and we're here today at the Malt Miller.
So Rob, what are we going to do today in the video?
Well, we're going to brew beer, and we're going to do it the simplest way possible, which is to brew using the brew in a bag method.
Awesome. Don't forget, if you like the content we're producing, there's always new stuff coming out, so click like below, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell for notifications. So Rob, why would someone want to do brew in a bag or grain brewing?
Okay, it's a really easy step into brewing beer using grain, and it has a lot more input from the brewer than it would if you've got a malt extract kit, or traditionally known as a beer kit, where you get a tin or a couple of tins in a box, bosh, with instructions, and there you go. When you're crafting something yourself, it gives you a better, or can do, give you a better sense of satisfaction for the final product. I did that myself.
So Rob, isn't all grain brewing really complicated? You need lots of equipment and lots of space.
All grain brewing is actually as complicated as the brewer wants to make it. So yes, you can go out and purchase loads of shiny equipment, takes up loads of space, and you have to really learn how to use. Or you can start in a really simple way that takes up very little space. You can do various different batch sizes with very little equipment, most of which, if you're pretty handy in the kitchen, you will probably have at home anyway.
So Rob, you're telling me I don't need to change anything at home, I don't need a dedicated brew space, and it can just fit in with life as normal type thing?
Yeah, sure. You can brew on your hob at home, which makes the whole thing much easier. We can do smaller batches, like just from 5 litres, which makes it much easier to fit in without the dedicated equipment and a dedicated brew space. You can, if you've got an apartment, you can brew in your apartment. You're not going to be boiling off huge amounts, so you don't have a huge amount of steam to worry about. And brewing on your hob at home makes it much easier.
So Rob, how do I go about getting the ingredients to make my favourite beer, say, I don't know, a Cornish IPA?
Okay, we've got hundreds of recipes on the site, and just because you're brewing using the brew in a bag method means that you can access all of those all grain recipes that we have on the site. We also have a recipe generator, so you can plug in the exact grain bill for your recipe and the hops and the yeast. We mill it fresh to order, and we can crush at the fine crush rate, which you're probably going to want for brewing the bag. Hit one button, it puts the whole lot in the basket, and that's the way that you can order, and then you can order it repeatedly.
So Rob, what if I haven't got a recipe and I don't know how the beer I want to drink is made?
Okay, we've got loads of information that's available on our website, and also we sell a myriad of books that all have brewing method and recipes for hundreds of different types of beers, one of which will suit your palate.
And what else, Bob?
So as I previously said, we got hundreds of recipes on the site, some of which we've put on, and many of which the community have put onto our website. You've also got our YouTube channel, and you've also got the whole of the internet, which is a huge inspiration for home brewers in general.
So Rob, what are the different methods to get to the end result of having some beer?
Okay, yeah, the great thing about this is it's such a flexible way to start brewing beer. You can brew on your hob at home, and that could be an induction or gas or electric. You can brew using more or less any size vessel. So if you've got a saucepan that's sort of 5 litres or above, you can get going with all grain brewing using this method of brewing.
So Rob, what if I want to make more beer than I can make in that 5 litre pot?
There's loads of options. So you can buy a ready-made piece of kit that is all-in-one vessel, boiler, kettle. You can buy a stainless steel kettle that you sit on a dedicated induction hob, or you can buy the same kettle that will sit on a gas burner. And of course, we can also repurpose a tea urn with just a few simple modifications that you can do at home. Makes a perfect brew in the bag vessel.
So Rob, what are the limitations in terms of going on the hob? Is there a batch size maximum that I can produce on there, or using the other methods you've just described? Yeah,
exactly. So your hob at home is going to depend on the batch size that you can do. So if you've got a very simple electric hob with just 4 rings on it, I would suggest you're going to be looking at like a 10 litre batch is going to be your absolute maximum. Some people have a gas hob with like a wok ring in the middle, so probably a 5 ring with a wok ring in the middle, you can actually do a much bigger batch on that because it's a much more powerful hob. Same again on induction, you can quite often cover 2 or 3 rings on an induction hob, and that means that you can do a bigger batch. By the time you're getting up to sort of 20 litres, you're then looking at a dedicated piece of equipment which you can buy very cheaply and very easily.
So for that 20 litres, what size kettle or pot am I going to need?
About a 30 litre pot.
So you're always going to need a pot that's bigger than the actual batch size that you want to
Absolutely,
have at the
definitely.
end.
We need some headspace in there for grain absorption, and also when you boil, you don't want any boilovers.
Okay, I've got my equipment, I've got my ingredients. What do I do?
Okay, so the very basics are we are heating water. In the brewing world, we call it liquor. We're heating liquor up to a certain temperature. We're going to put our grain in using the bag, and we're going to steep it in that liquor for a set amount of time. We're then going to pull the grain out of the liquor. We're going to add hops, and we're going to boil that liquor. And then at the end, we're going to strain it into a fermenter, cool it down, add the yeast, it will ferment, we will have beer.
So we've talked you through a few different methods of doing brew in a bag. So we thought we'd give it a go. What method are you going for, Rob?
Well, here I've got a complete replication of how you can carry out a brew in the bag brew at home on your kitchen hob. I've actually got a dedicated induction hob here, but it's basically a saucepan on top of a hob. See here, you've got a tea urn.
Yes, so I've got the Grainfather sparge water heater, which is like a tea urn.
Yeah.
It's an electric element in a sealed base.
Yeah.
This is essentially what I used to use before I got an all-in-one system. Did 6 months of brewing a bag brewing at home.
Okay, and the small modification we've got is it's got a tap, or a ball valve type taps right at the very bottom.
Ball valve tap with a barb on there so we can connect a hose, and on the inside we've got a bazooka filter, so again we can filter out any bits.
Exactly the same. So I've got exactly the same system on here. So I've got a ball valve on the bottom with a bazooka hop filter.
So Rob, we've both got bazooka filters. What's the purpose of those? What does that do?
Okay, like we're going to separate the grain from the liquor using a bag, we also need to separate the liquor from the hops at the end of the boil. So we do have a filter, both have a filter that's connected to the back of the tap, so that when we open the valve, the wort comes out and the hops stay behind in the actual kettle itself.
Are there any other methods for filtering out the hops?
Yeah, we don't need a hop filter. We could actually use what we call a hop sock. So it's another bag, another fine bag, put the hops inside, tie a knot in it, chuck it into the boil. Now, our recipes state that we're to mash for 60 minutes at about 66 degrees. The grain is at room temperature, so it's going to bring down the temperature of the liquor inside the kettles. So we've both got them at about 74 degrees, aiming for that 66 degree mash temperature. So I'm making a Pilsner.
And I'm making a Cornish-inspired IPA.
Nice, let's get doughed in.
So Rob, that's our 60-minute mash over. Anything to note?
Yeah, so the idea is that we have a stable as mash temperature as possible. Now obviously it can go down, it's losing heat the whole time, so we need to keep an eye on it. We can turn the element back on or turn your hob back on, whatever method of heating that you're using. You can do that, but you need to do it with caution because obviously the bag might be sitting on the element, so we need to be careful of that. And actually if we do turn the element back on, you're better off to drain out some mash liquor from the bottom and pour it back onto the top. That way that you're doing a bit of recirculation there, which is helping keeping a uniform heat.
Rob, are there any tips or tricks that we can do to help stabilise that temperature?
Yeah, sure. If you can't actually turn the element or the heating source back on, it's quite easy to insulate the vessel whilst you're mashing. So we've seen all types of Heath Robinson type approaches to that insulation. It can be simple as putting a coat over the top, duvet, sleeping bag, something like that, just to help keep the heat inside the vessel.
So Rob, the next step is to what? Take the bag out of the kettle?
Yeah, sure. Remember, we're doing this the simplest way we possibly can. So we're just going to pull the bag containing the grains out of the kettle. We're going to put it into a plastic bucket here. And then just before this kettle comes up to boil, we're going to pour the resultant liquor back in, so we're not going to lose any. We're not going to squeeze the bag or hang it or sparge it or anything like that. Remember, we're doing this the simplest way we possibly can.
Okay. So we've finished the mash. We've removed the grain bag. Then any excess liquor that came out of the grain bag, we've then tipped back into the kettle and headed up to the boil.
Okay, and we've actually reached the boil point now. So a couple of things to note. When we're boiling wort, it's really important that we boil with the lid off. Part of the job of the boil is to get rid of any astringent flavours that we really don't want to end up in the final beer. So there's quite some volatile flavours in the mash. We want them gone, so boil with the lid off. While it's coming up to the boil, it's probably quicker if you leave the lid on, but once it's boiling, lid off.
So when it gets to the boil, Rob, any tips?
Yeah, it can be a little bit tricky when it's coming up to the boil, and that's because wort boils like milk, so it's got no surface tension, so it rises up the pot really quickly. So you have to really keep an eye on it. A good idea is you can actually fold what we call the hop break, the foam that comes off. You can fold that back in to the wort. That helps. Also, if you have got limited space, if you have a squirty, like a garden sprayer with nice clean water in it, you can spray that on top, and that tends to break the surface tension and just lower that temperature slightly to stop a boil over.
If you're adding hops, Rob, for the brew, is that going to make any difference, or adding at certain times?
Yeah, that's another really easy way to stop a boil over. So hops break the surface tension of the wort. So just before it starts boiling, you could add your hops in at that point. Now at this stage is probably a good time to point out that you need to know how to read an actual beer recipe. Now we've got a really good blog post that explains exactly how to do that, and you can find that linked below.
As well as the blog post, we have a range of recipe books which will also talk you through how to understand the recipe, and there is also a video on our channel which you can click the link up here, and that will explain a bit more about understanding your recipe.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our boil. We've both brewed different beers here. What's the situation there?
I've added my hops at different times to you. We've both got different grain bills. Doesn't matter what the recipe is, you've just got to follow the steps and the processes, but steps through the brew are very similar. The
whole process is always the same. We are mashing in liquor at a set temperature for a set amount of time. We're then bringing that liquor up to the boil. We're boiling with our hops, then we're cooling, and then we're fermenting. So they're the basic steps. It doesn't matter what beer you're brewing, that's the scale of what we're doing.
Okay, so now we've done those steps, the next part is to chill and then ferment our worts. Rob, how do we go about chilling it down?
Okay, we have to bear in mind here that we're doing this the most simple way possible. So we are both going to drain our wort into a plastic fermenter, and we're going to leave it overnight and then pitch the yeast in the morning once it gets down to the temperature that is instructed on our individual yeast packets. Normally about 20 degrees for an ale, down to about 12 degrees for a lager.
Rob, are there any other options other than just chilling it overnight?
Yeah, there are, and obviously we are trying to, in an absolute ideal world, chill the wort down as quickly as possible, so it's the yeast that takes hold and not some wild yeast or bug. We can use what they call an immersion chiller, where you put it actually in the wort and run cold water through it. That chills it. There's plate chillers which work on a similar basis, but they're outside of the kettle. Or we can put the wort into a fermenter and then put the fermenter into a cold sink of water, or even better, a cold sink of ice.
It's really important to note at this point on, now we're on the cold side, that anything the wort comes into contact with has to be thoroughly cleaned and sanitised. Rob, have you got any tips on how to handle that?
Yeah, definitely. Don't skip on that stage at all, because it can ruin the whole process. So when you buy your ingredients, also buy some no-rinse sanitizer.
So Rob, that's brew day done. Any hints, tips or thoughts on how that went?
Yeah, actually how easy it was. So we got so much equipment here at Malt Miller headquarters, we can brew on anything we like, and it's been an awful long time since I've done a real back to basics brew, and we've just proved that that was about as back to basics as you can possibly do. Really successfully brewed, worts came out exactly as we wanted it to, and it was really simple.
I've got to say, it was kind of like a bit of a trip down memory lane, going back to those days of doing brew in a bag, and I forgot how easy it is actually to do.
Exactly,
with
yeah.
Minimal equipment.
Yeah, so the next steps are fermentation. Now, that would be the same if you were brewing a kit or doing any other type of brew, but that's a video for another day.
Hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any comments or if you're a Brew in a Bag brewer, please leave them below.
And of course, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.